MacD wanted to know and was curious as to whether or not in Kings, chapter 2, First Kings, or is it Second Kings? Second Kings, chapter 2, verses 23 through 24, there are some quote-unquote kids mocking the prophet Elisha, and he's wondering, were these kids or like children or
what gives?
Yeah.
Elisha thought sensitive about his baldness.
Some junior hires made fun of the guy for losing his hair, and I can understand why Elisha.
I wish,
call him down fire, but
so if you make fun
I think
of a
Sean
prophet,
has a better answer
Yeah.
for us than that.
Yeah, it's one of those passages that if you spend any time on the internet, it depends on you, not reading anything more than what's handed to you by the person who's trying to elicit some sort of emotive reaction. What they'll usually do is include it with emotive terms like kids when that's not what the text says, or murder when there isn't some proactive attempt like Elisha going sick'em on the she-bears and so forth. All that we're told that literally within the span of 2 verses is how many of these people there were, that they were people, and it uses the term youths. In Hebrew it's yilad, and we'll go more into that significance here in a moment.
Yeah.
And that, of course, 42 of them did not walk away from the encounter. So assuming it was a total loss, at least that many came out from the city to mock the prophet of God.
In a very significant way.
Who, according to within the same chapter, will contextualize that quite nicely. Now, when it comes to what the opening passages is, what city did they come out from? We have gangsters here in Tucson, and they're usually anywhere from 15 to 19 and just talk a lot of smack, not really harming anybody, but certainly not making anybody's day. But if you know that they're from South Tucson, you could say, let's pay close attention. I don't know if they were cartel kids or just hooligans from the U of A. If, on the other hand, they came from, say, for example, Syria, maybe immigrants trying to enlighten our Western culture with the ways of ISIS and jihad, that would be a lot more concerning. So where were these kids from? Well, it says from the city of what? Bethel. Now,
a very significant city historically.
Yeah, as far as the Hebrews were concerned, it was called the house of God, but at this time, geopolitically, it was one of the primary centers. Jezebel, because Ahab wasn't running anything, let's be honest, Jezebel had set up as a center of worship.
Well, it actually went back farther than that.
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Jeroboam was offered by God the keys to the kingdom, if you will, when Solomon's son Rehoboam was pretty much showing himself to be a flake of the first order. Jeroboam got a little nervous over the idea of being the head of 10 tribes, and the other 2 tribes were down south, and Judah controlled Jerusalem, and the center of Israeli worship was there in Jerusalem. So, Jeroboam's like, oh man, if they go back down to Jerusalem, they're going to see all the stuff that David built and Solomon's temple, and they're going to be disloyal to me. So I know what I'll do. I'll appeal to convenience. We will set up a temple here in Bethel, the house of God. Hey, in fact, we're even going to make it easier on these locals to worship by giving them some, visual effects. Let's make a golden calf.
That goes back to Moses.
Yeah, that's traditional. So they set up golden calf worship, and that was the first example of official idolatry. Took place in Bethel, and from that time onward, Bethel, house of God, became kind of an ironic joke.
Yeah, and again, not to get too far off on the tangent of where these kids were from, quote unquote, but it was originally named Bethel because that's where Jacob, the later renamed Israel, the forefather of the Hebrew people, had his vision of the angel of the Lord, who we would know today as Jesus of Nazareth. So the point being made is this spiritually significant place had been co-opted by corrupt rulers, and we're now promoting the worship of the Sumerian god Baal. Now, Sumerian, Canaanite, we'll get more into the semantics of that in a moment, but this particular Baal, which just means Lord in Canaanite, is made a point of emphasis of the rain god Baal, who was a particularly bloodthirsty deity, and he was worshipped mostly not just through the cutting of yourself, but the systematic persecution and murder, the shedding of blood, of anyone who didn't call him Baal, who didn't call him Lord. And this trend is fairly common across most pagan cultures. The Caesars, for example, persecuted people for making anyone other than themselves Lord. You can observe our other gods, but unless you say Kairos Kyrios in Latin, which is Caesar is Lord, or Greek, excuse me, Koine Greek, then it would be a death penalty. And that's why many Christians in the first 3 centuries of the Roman Empire were killed, at least as far as our involvement with it. So note that point. They came from a city that was notoriously associated with ritual sacrifice, ritual bloodletting of themselves, and the specific targeting of people of God. And you don't have to take my word for it and say like, oh, well, you know, it's in some vague, you know, Hebrew culture and stuff. It's literally the previous book. In the accounts of the rise of Jezebel, why was she so eager to hunt down all the prophets of God? Why did Elijah, not Elisha, who we're speaking about here, but his predecessor Elijah, say, they have killed your prophets? They, speaking objectively, present tense, as if this is still going on and only I am left.
Right.
What was going on? Baal worship. So note,
A very intolerant form of paganism, by the way.
which is
Funny
always
how paganism tends to go that way.
Yeah, always the case. Now, note this point. They came from a city that was associated, literally coerced and co-opted from Jewish culture into Canaanite culture, specifically from where Jezebel was from. She was a descendant of Tyre.
Sidon.
Sidon, thank you. So, northern Israel, but definitely not Hebrew. So, they come from a place that's known to kill prophets of God, and a bunch of people come out of that city. Well, how many people? At least 42, assuming it was a total extermination of these youths, which is the word being used. Now, once again, a crowd of at least 42 people. I know if they vote blue, then you can storm the Capitol building. There's no consequence for that. But we've literally seen crowds of maybe even 20 people and would consider it a legitimate threat. Why? Because you only need maybe 4 for a violent attack to gang up on somebody, let alone 10 times that many.
Yeah, if you doubt that, check your interwebs.
Yeah, so when we're talking about these issues, a crowd of 42 people, at least, come out to meet somebody from a place that's known to not like or treat well the somebody of which they're meeting. And what? They say, go up, you bald head, go up. Now, the manipulative people would say, emphasize on bald head. The reason they were cursed by God and these she-bears came after them was because they called him bald. Well, I mean, I understand the sensitivity here, but when we're talking about the
No, you
other...
don't understand it yet. I do, but you would.
Yeah, I got more hair than I know what to do with.
Yeah.
But
You
what-
might. Yeah.
I get it well.
Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
They'd focus on go up, or you bald head. What about the first 2 words, go up? Well, again, you don't even have to leave the chapter to understand the significance of what they were saying. In 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 1,
Yeah.
not the end of the chapter, which is what we're reading, 1, it says what? That Elisha's predecessor, was taken up into heaven in a fiery chariot. Now, only Elisha saw this, and that was his confirmation, being in on the vision, so to speak, that he was the actual inheritor. There were more than one people in Israel that were speaking on behalf of God, but the head of the school of the prophets, the ones from the tribe of Levi and others, would be responsible for informing and educating people on the Word of God and would be available to perform miracles as needed to verify that message to the tribes of Israel. What happened? The predecessor, the head of the prophets, the one that people from this town were seeking to exterminate, heard that Elijah went up into heaven. Now, obviously, they're not going to buy the story. They'll probably come up with their own explanation, but they'll at least, jump on the slogan and say, oh, yeah, your prophet went up. Well, he's not here anymore. Why don't you go up? You, Elisha, you, his successor, go up. And then to add on the little youth lingo, they also mention his baldness. But here's the point. Go up. is a reference to the cessation of life of the predecessor of the prophet from a city that has a divided reputation and interest in the cessation of life of other prophets, and a crowd of people numbering fully capable of leading to the cessation of life of prophets. Now all that we need is clarification on the she-bears. What does the verse actually say? It says that the prophet of God looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord, and it came 2 female bears out of the woods and mauled of the youths 42. Now, that's interesting, but when we're talking about the mental image, what do we generally think of? The manipulative people would say, well, the bears charged the boys and they weren't hurting him, but they were assaulted and they were hunted down to the last man. Well, albeit concerned as far as this not being a normal situation, I'll grant you that. But when I'm talking to someone about the behavior of she-bears, those of you who watch The Office, Dwight Schrute had a extensive knowledge of bear pattern behavior, right? For those of you who are amateurs in bearology, mother bears aren't generally known to be offensive creatures, even when they get violent. But when they get violent, it's because of one thing, or usually 3 to 4 things only, and that's what? Their babies, the cubs. If you come between a mama bear and a cub, there's a reason why they call you a moron on trailheads, because that's going to get you killed. They will do anything and everything to keep their cubs safe. Even a perceived threat is enough for them to maul you.
By the way, I almost saw that in action in a trip to Yellowstone when I was a kid.
Yeah,
That's another story.
Wow.
Yeah, stupid motorist laws are not just for people who drive into floodwater. But anyway, when we're talking about this issue, what do bears generally do? They protect their object of interest. So if we're following the theme, where the passage doesn't just mention bears, but she-bears, it wasn't so that we understood their anatomy. It was so that we understood their pattern of behavior. And it was what? To protect their cub in this situation, which the Lord apparently was able to introduce into their minds as Elijah. So from a city known to be very intolerant, if not aggressive, violent, and persecuting the people of God, a group fully capable and generally known for attacking the people of God, using language that would suggest him being killed, or at least going up into heaven, which, unless you're here for the rapture, is going to involve what? Dying physically. Saying things that involve a physical death, coming from a place that is more than eager to tell these quote-unquote youths physical death is a good thing if enacted on the people of God, and what? Coming in a sizable crowd to do so. Now,
Right.
Like a gang.
Yes.
so here's
Mob.
the imaging. Here's the amusing image in all of this. These youths were so persistent in their desire to cause Elijah to go up that it took 42 of them to get mauled to death before what? Before they finally stopped. So even if you don't grant that, even if you pretend, well, you have to just read that verse in isolation despite the charter of the English language requiring us to require more context than less, let's just pretend that all of that is not insane. When we are looking at this text, when we are asking the question, use, what usually gets people to motively react is, they were just kids. You're going to get kids killed, or at least let kids get killed, because they came from a bad town, or because they had a bad upbringing, or because they called some guy bald. Well, again, manipulation aside, what is the term youth translated as? And if you look up any Hebrew lexicon, it is used to describe newborns, which, again, both of you have more experience with newborn babies than I do. Are they known to gather in groups higher than 15 and to articulate cultural references that would threaten someone's life?
Generally speaking, no.
They aren't really articulating anything for that matter,
Yeah.
let alone leaving a city. Not if mom has anything to say about it, right? It has also been used to describe young boys. That's kind of the image that's being presented here, but does it fit? Well, what's the other usage? Anyone, and you can look this up in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, anyone under the age of 30.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Youths.
going
Youths,
ba-
as they're
youths.
known. Yeah.
Going back to the fallacy behind all of this, it's intent on using emotive language rather than accurately representing what's going on. A crowd of people, even if you don't know the language, generally not well intended, from a city that, according to the previous book, is not known for treating the only named individual in this passage well, let alone respecting their right to life. But then, with the behavior of the she-bears, with the specificity of the curse of God and its implication, with the fact that all of these things are taking place, what can we know? If I'm going to contextualize this language properly, youths, in any sense in which it's oftentimes presented as inflammatory, doesn't fit. And if my interpretation is nonsense, and you'll see this online as well, people try to say, oh yeah, Isaac, right? The forefather of Jacob, he married Rebekah when she was 6 years old. And they will point and emphasize that as calling her young and says, see, she was 6 years old. Well, you read the passage and go, well, yeah, the word described for her as a young maid, a virgin, could describe a 6-year-old girl, but what does she do in the situation? In the book of Genesis, we're told that she volunteers her time, effort, and energy to be sent out to go get water for the family. And when she sees Abraham's servant, whose name's not told, but we're pretty certain it was Eli, right? He says what? Lord, as the one that was called to be Isaac's wife, it's going to be the one that offers to water my camels. We want a good girl here, let alone a generous girl. Maybe a strong girl, too, because water ain't light. She waters sufficiently the needs of 15 camels, was it? That's a lot of water, because camels are some thirsty beasts.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was when you put all of these images together and say a 6-year-old was able to gather, what, over 100 gallons of water to provide for these animals, let alone being sent out at all by the people, you realize that this is a ridiculous scenario and the interpretation isn't warranted. Well, do that as well here. If you read into this passage, the youths can only and will only ever mean someone who's under the age of 12, well, it's a pretty, I guess, harsh and overreactive point on God's part. But if you actually know something about the language, what does it suggest? These were grown men by modern standards. So if they are saying things that are threatening someone's life, doing some, or coming from a place that would threaten someone's life, in numbers that would threaten anybody's life.
Motive and means, yeah.
Then what does God do? He sends she-bears to protect Elisha's life. But they don't want you to include that. They want to focus on bald head and God's a meanie.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So there you go.
So this was the MS-13 of Bethel, and
Yeah.
they had it coming.
Yeah, pretty much. Got tired of doing graffiti. You had to chisel it into the sides of the wall. So
In a way.
Yeah, and if you know anything about those Baal worshippers, they were brutal.
yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
you don't even have to
brutal.
leave the Bible to learn that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Sean, for that background.